And now we're going to bring in Mark Levin, host of Life, Liberty, and Levin. His new book is called The Democrat Party Hates America. It is out now. It's already a #1 bestseller on Amazon. And Mark joins us with his thoughts, his take on what he saw today in this testimony. Mark, you heard Jonathan talking about how uncurious Merrick Garland was. He was particularly uncurious when it came to Leslie Wolf, who said, you know, look, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. We're going to stay away from Hunter's storage facility. We're not going in there. That's just one example. What stood out to you, Mark?
First of all, Jonathan's right on, and they have a lot of ficus plants in this administration, to be perfectly honest with you. Now, that said, I was chief of staff to an attorney general, and I went to many hearings with my attorney general Meese. And those hearings were very robust. And my attorney general went toe-to-toe with Democrats and some Republicans, and he wasn't hiding behind anybody else. He wasn't hiding behind any platitudes, and he knew exactly what was going on in his department, and he got up there, and that's what they did. That's not what happens anymore, apparently, with this attorney general, and it's about time, I would argue, that they raise this to a constitutional level, or they're going to keep running this hamster wheel. And what do I mean by that? I mean they need to subpoena the schedules of this attorney general, his deputy attorney general, the associate attorney general, and the head of the criminal division. They need to subpoena their notes from the various meetings that they've had with each other. They need to subpoena the emails and text messages they've had among each other. And let's go at it. This is a very serious matter. Congress is in the Constitution. The Department of Justice is not in the Constitution. And if he wants to make the argument that is Merrick Garland, that everything he's doing is somehow privileged government activity, that he'll make in front of a federal judge, a circuit court, and eventually the Supreme Court. It's my experience that's not going to even come close to flying. He's not a member of the White House staff. He's not the President of the United States. If Joe Biden wants to issue executive privilege directive to protect his Attorney General's Department of Justice, then by God, let him give it a shot. But at this point, we can sit here and talk about this, that this comes up and he won't tell us this and he won't tell us that. Congress needs to get smart. They need to get aggressive. They need to push him against the wall, figuratively. I believe the deputy attorney general is the one who's running this department. That's why he comes off like a bumbling fool. But that doesn't matter. Things are happening in this department that should not be happening. And he can get up there with his bumper sticker comments over and over again that they don't take partisan positions, that he doesn't represent the president, he's not the prosecutor for the Congress. That doesn't tell us anything. He doesn't say anything. Yeah. And I also agree, he's not only violated the special counsel regulation, is what it is, on multiple occasions, but the idea that he couldn't replace David Weiss because that would set back their investigation and set up statute of limitations is ridiculous. Yeah. David Weiss isn't doing all the day-to-day work in those offices. He's directing it. And that can be accomplished in a day or two with a new special counsel saying, okay, where are we, everybody? Whether he spends 10 days at the desk, 10 hours or 20 hours or whatever it is, they can get boned up on this very, very quickly. There is no excuse for any of this, no justification for letting statutes of limitations resign, right. That phony deal with Hunter Biden, the lack of a special counsel investigating the president of the United States. That's why we have that statute, not to investigate your opponent. All of this isn't a mistake. This is what we call a pattern. And so I think they really ought to take it to this guy in the senior level Department of Justice. They ought to get their notes, fight for their emails, fight for their texts, see what this. I can tell you, when I was chief of staff to an attorney general, we often had what we called the roundtable meeting, the attorney general, the deputy attorney general, the associate attorney general, the assistant attorneys general of all the different divisions. Sometimes we'd have the head of the FBI, the head of the DEA, the head of the prisons. People take notes. Yeah. The subject matter of the meetings are noted. They need to get a hold of all this stuff and start to do the hard work of unraveling who's in charge, who's making these statements, and while they're at it, they ought to figure out who Jack Smith is actually reporting to in that department. He reports to somebody. So who is he reporting to? Who's calling the shots? I think this would go a long way in helping the American people.
Yeah, it would also go a long way in knowing whether or not Attorney General Merrick Garland told the whole truth today about what he was aware of and not aware of in these communications with regard to, for one example, that while he was, worried about Weiss losing step on all of this, if he was put aside, they already lost step because they overran the statute of limitations on all the tax issues related to Hunter Biden and his activities with Burisma. So, negligence can be a very active move, and that may have been exactly what happened there.
One thing?
Yes.
When I'm a private lawyer, if I miss deadlines like this, that are so crucial to a case, I'm disbarred.
Absolutely.
This isn't a joke.
Yeah.
Somebody did something
no, it's not just,
purposely
oops,
here.
I didn't realize what day it was on the calendar. I think you're 100% right about that. Mark, before we let you go, the book is called The Democrat Party Hates America. I think it's pretty clear what the thesis is there. Give us a sense of your argument.
Well, the argument is whether you go to the Confederacy and slavery, which the Democrat Party defended, was the party of the Confederacy, segregation, the Ku Klux Klan, lynching, eugenics, into the current period of time where it now supports a completely different agenda, but it seeks to empower itself. I think the bottom line is, we only have a minute or two, is this. This is not a normal political party. It is an autocratic party. Every day we wake up and you cover and I cover on radio and so forth, what? The Democrat Party. We don't call it that. We have an open border. Nature didn't do that. The Democrat Party did that. We're destroying energy independence. Nature didn't do that. The Democrat Party did that. We are destroying what's taking place in our classrooms. Nature didn't do that. The Democrat Party's doing that. And I could go on and on and on, and I do in the book, as a matter of fact. So what I try to do is explain that unlike the Republican Party, which in many ways is utterly feckless, by the way, the Democrat Party has to be looked at through the lens of power. It's its power. Everything it does is not for the American people. It's not for the country. It's to empower itself. That's what's key to understand. It is an autocratic party that gets involved in the culture, that gets involved in governance, that gets involved in voting, that gets involved in everything. And this is the nature of these autocratic parties. Why do you think they want to nationalize elections? Why is the border open other than to turn, there's only one reason, to turn Texas blue. There's no other reason for what's taking place, all that horrendous activity on the border. And why is it that they're packing the courts, as you and I speak, with these radical left-wing bomb throwers, and they threaten Supreme Court justices, and they want to do away with the Electoral College, which means half the country won't have representation in this country? Why they try and twist the 14th Amendment into a pretzel? There's only one party that's doing all these things. So why are they doing it? Because autocratic parties want people to have allegiance to the party, not to the country. And I would encourage people, if you don't believe what I'm saying, read it and check 65 pages of endnotes. I didn't make this stuff up.
All right, Mark, thank you very much. Mark Levin joining us with his perspective from Life, Liberty, and Levin. And the book that he has just written is called The Democrat Party Hates America. And he has laid out some of it, but there's a lot more in the book.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.